There's actually really one question that everyone wants me to ask more than anything by far. And the question is, of all your years of research, all the studies, every single piece of data you've ever looked at, do you know how we could avoid cancer, diabetes, heart disease, chronic kidney disease, multiple sclerosis, and all these other horrible diseases that we just want to know? We really don't want to do research. We're not that interested in health and nutrition. We just want to stay healthy. From all that, and we argue with each other because we all have opinions, but from what the hardcore, unbiased, best research says, do you know how we could avoid these diseases? Anyone who would like to answer?
I think it probably can echo what everyone here will say, basically, mostly, I believe. And that's the wholeness of food. I like that concept. The whole food. That doesn't mean to say that we just eat raw whole food salads all day long, but it's the wholeness of food. When we actually choose the food, the whole thing together, whether it's cooked or not, or diced and sliced, that's one thing I think is a simple message, just offering that idea to people to get as close as they can to that concept of eating that kind of food. Go the whole way, that's, I suspect, the best of all. They become accustomed to it and they stay there. The second thing that I would say, and I have just two fairly simple, straightforward things. The second is try to avoid foods with animal protein in it, basically animal-based foods. That's a hard thing for me to say. It was from early days because I was raised on a farm milking cows. And I started out my career actually advocating for greater consumption of animal protein products. But through the years, I finally arrived at this point. Once we sort of decide that we have to eat animal foods to get that special protein, we distort the whole rest of the diet. And so we see these rather remarkable correlations. I don't know correlations, Walt, we have to worry about correlation not being equal to causation. But actually, when you see this, and they're consistent, they're usually called by other names, other kinds of foods, the correlation is so perfect when we look at across countries to see the relationship between the consumption of animal protein or surrogates, such as cholesterol consumption, saturated fat, and so forth. When you see that, it's really consistent to see that when societies start gravitating toward more and more consumption of animal-based foods, there's a problem. So two things. Eat the food in a whole food form, not take the individual nutrients out and try to do stuff with it. And secondly, just try to eat plants. It's fairly simple. I think if we could just sort of convey that simple message, we'll be able to capture probably, I would suggest, 80 to 90% of the achievable, and 80 to 90% of the achievable gains that we can make without getting caught up in all the details.
Steve, I'm going to redirect the answer a little bit, if I may. So you asked us how we can prevent all these scourges, how we can avoid them. Brenda told the story of her father, and these personal and intimate stories are always poignant. So I have one too. Athar Ali was a dear friend of mine, naturopathic physician, first my resident, then my protege, then my colleague, the first naturopathic physician ever on the faculty at Yale. One of the most beautiful people I've ever known. Plant-based diet, no exposure to toxins, loving wife, beautiful children, tranquil, peaceful, meditated daily, slept enough, and died tragically at 42 of esophageal cancer. And I still have a hard time saying it. I still hear his soft voice in my mind anytime I talk about him. So I think one critical consideration for all of us is humility. We are vulnerable creatures. We control ship and sail, but never wind and wave. So nothing you hear from any of us can ever offer a guarantee. All we can hope to do is shift the odds in our favor. But I agree emphatically with Dr. Campbell about how massively we can shift the odds. So to pivot again and reinforce the message, I completed my training in internal medicine in 1991, went to Yale to do my training in preventive medicine for the next 2 years. And in 1993, the year I completed that training, a paper was published in JAMA which had a major influence on the trajectory of my career. This was by Bill Foege and Mike McGinnis, entitled Actual Causes of Death in the United States. And it was an evidence-based answer to your question, Steve. So what these two epidemiologists did was enumerate the factors, the root causes explaining the leading causes of death every year in our country. So they went beyond what winds up on a death certificate to say, okay, the death certificate says stroke or heart disease or cancer, but we want to know what caused that. And by the time they were done, almost all of the premature deaths that happen in this country every year, but for a rounding error, were explained away. And the full list of factors was 10 things, and that list included environmental exposures to toxins, socioeconomic disparities. Poverty is a leading cause of death, right? So some of what we need to do is not just about how we take care of our own bodies. Some of what we need to do requires action by the body politic. But what reverberated with me as a young man just starting my career in preventive medicine was that 80% of the net effect was concentrated in the first three things, which I've described ever since as bad use of feet, forks, and fingers. Right? Physical activity levels were inadequate, dietary patterns were bad, and we were smoking excessively. Again, diet's now number one, but if you go beyond that list, you can append a few more. I like feet, forks, fingers, sleep, stress, and love. That's a bit more holistic, Colin, to tap into the theme. And so we can shift our personal risk, and we can shift the risk at the population level massively away from all of these chronic diseases and premature death from any cause. That's got to be good enough, because we don't get a guarantee no matter what we do.